Welcome, everybody. We are back to our weekly Bible reading recap. This week, we're looking at Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther,
That's right.
as we are trying to read the Bible 2 times in 1 year. So I hope you're sticking with us, or at least close to it. And anyway, I hope these are encouraging for you to just stick with it and keep reading. I hope we're offering a little bit of value on kind of what to expect and maybe a little bit about how to think about some of it. So Andrew's here, I'm Mike, and what do you think, Andrew? Ezra, Nehemiah, Esther.
Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. So 3 books, which I thought were quite nice reads. I like these books.
They're great. I think these are more well known.
bit.
Chronicles was less well known.
Yes. Some of the stories maybe we knew in Chronicles, but these books I think have some really memorable moments.
Right.
Maybe especially Esther.
Right.
I think people may be more familiar with Esther's
I think
story.
almost everybody knows Esther. There have
Yeah.
been good films made about
Yeah,
it. It's
that's
a
right.
great story. You know, there's a lot of drama.
Yeah, I will say I also think there are a lot of stories in here that maybe we don't remember are in here. Like there's some moments here where I was reading and I thought I didn't remember that little bit of that story, or some detail,
Yeah.
So yeah, I think these are good books to revisit, and I enjoyed reading them.
I think
So,
these are books that probably, if you're going to church fairly regularly, these are probably more familiar
Yeah.
than some of the other ones we've read so far, or some of the other ones we're going to get to.
Yeah.
You just don't see as much.
So let me start with this. One of the things that I think is helpful when we're reading these books is to try to keep the timeline in mind. And that's fairly easy to do with Ezra and Nehemiah. There's some questions about some material in Ezra and Nehemiah and whether it's in chronological order. But particularly when it comes to Esther, I find it helpful to sort of place Esther in line with some of these events. So there's basically going to be 3 big stories here. We've got the people of Israel are now coming out of captivity, and the first wave of people returning is going to be led by a couple of guys, Zerubbabel and Jeshua, and they're going to try to rebuild the temple. That's going to be sort of the main task.
Right, that's the job. That's the decree that Cyrus
right.
gave. We talked about in Chronicles. It's the end of Chronicles. It's the beginning
Very
of Ezra.
beginning of Ezra. There's going to be 2 other waves that come back, and we can talk about these in more detail. But Ezra is going to come back second after some time has passed. And the way I like to say this is that he tries to rebuild the people or the worship.
Right.
And so he tries to sort of set things, and he actually has that decree from who's the king at that point of Persia. Hey, go teach them the law. Like, they're not doing things right, which is kind of funny that the Persian king says that. And then finally, Nehemiah comes, brings this 3rd wave of people with him, and Nehemiah is going to try to rebuild the wall. And so that's going to be his task. And in the middle of that, and this is where I like to place Esther, in the middle of that, I think it's kind of in the era of Ezra, Nehemiah.
I think so.
Probably before Nehemiah comes back. The story of Esther happens, but it's helpful for me to keep this in perspective because Esther's happening way back in Persia while all of these people are back in Israel trying to rebuild things. So that's helpful for me to keep in mind. So if you didn't know that while you were reading, maybe you want to go back and read it again with that in mind, or think about the stories you read and try to place them in that order.
I actually meant to look up try to get a specific timeline of those kings and who's who, because sometimes we have Greek names and
Of the
sometimes
Persian
we
kings,
have
yes.
of the Persian kings and where all this was happening. So maybe I'll try that here real quick while we're talking.
Yeah.
But
Well,
yeah,
maybe we'll get real fancy and put it on the screen.
maybe
I don't
not
know.
this time.
I don't know if we'll do that.
I think that does help because I was thinking that as I was listening to it, I listened to it all basically at once, and it can get a little bit confusing.
Well, if you thought reading Jewish kings was hard, wait till you start trying to introduce these Persian names. It's challenging. I will say, if this is your first time reading through these books, or maybe you just don't read through them often, I would encourage people not to get discouraged reading these names. It can be challenging, and there's a lot of things you can get from these readings without knowing the specific kings or what they did in history.
And that's never the point. The point is never to try to memorize all these people.
Right.
You use kings, like I think I've said this before, like I teach history sometimes to college classes, and I use the presidents as kind of the overarching timeline, and then these events kind of all fit here, and that's what Kings and Chronicles are doing, and to a degree here. So we get the reign of this king, It just helps us put it
so
that
to that
way.
point, the goal is not to know everything about these Persian kings, but it is helpful if you get a chance to sort of try to get the big picture in your mind about these kings and maybe just generally who they are.
Right.
Some of that will serve helpful as you continue to read the Bible.
Right. And there's quite a bit of information outside of Scripture on these guys too. The Babylonians and Persians kept a lot of records.
Yeah. Well, and the later we go in history, the real ancient history, our knowledge of that gets fuzzier. Closer we get to, further down the line we go, the Babylonians, the Persians, we have a lot of information on these guys. So, okay, well, do you have something on the kings, or you want to?
No, go ahead.
Okay,
let's go. Well, I was just looking that up and
let's talk Ezra.
Okay,
let's talk Ezra. We've got the first name for Ezra, but the first main characters are Zerubbabel and Jeshua. What did you see in that first sort of wave of people coming back? Anything noteworthy or?
It reminded me a lot of when the people left Egypt.
Okay.
Right? Because, not exactly, but the people left Egypt, the Egyptians were giving them gifts, and they carried off all this treasure.
Yeah.
And God actually said, you're going to do that. This is part of his humbling of Egypt. But in this case, Cyrus is sending them back, and they are given a lot of treasure by the king. They have letters to whatever they need out of the treasury. You'll hear this phrase of the areas west of the Euphrates, right? They have the power to draw money and support from all that. And then the king specifically gives them all the stuff that Nebuchadnezzar took away from the temple, which is hugely important. And then they gave them more money and other goods. And then the people themselves, I think both the Persians and because not all the Jews went, only 40-some thousand people went. And so they all just, they carried back a lot of treasure. And then so did Ezra. But that first wave was 40-some thousand people, and they're going to rebuild the temple, but basically Cyrus gave them carte blanche to what they want. So it reminded me of that, number one. It also was surprising that only 40-some thousand people went. I would have thought a lot of people went. A lot more people would go. But I think I used to think that, well, that must be the only faithful people. But I don't think that anymore.
Yeah,
I just think that's because we read these other stories. Nehemiah is still there, and Mordecai
and Esther.
So on.
So I think what we're going to see is as these people come back to the land, not only are we to understand that there are other people throughout the kingdom that are continuing to be faithful, but also remember we mentioned last week that there's 70 years of time that we, to this point in our Bible reading, have not read anything about.
Right.
And we're going to get some of those stories when we read Jeremiah, the end of Jeremiah, when we read Daniel especially. We're going to get a lot of those stories.
Right.
But I think what some of that tells us is, first of all, 70 years is a long time. And life continued for these people in captivity. And they have families. And they've established lives and businesses and all this. And so it's not as if we should condemn them for not returning. Well, but there's a level of comfort that they've attained there. And maybe some of that's good and maybe some of that's bad.
I think that's for sure the case. But that's what Jeremiah, and we're not there yet, but Jeremiah has happened already. We just haven't read it yet. Jeremiah told them, when you go, remember it was when you go, there's something, you can't get out of this. When you go, get, work and build your communities and, grow your families.
Seek the welfare of Babylon.
Exactly. And I think many of them did. And, we'll get into Esther, and there are some challenges to that. And again, Daniel, and you see some different things happening. So I think you really want to step back. Plus, I also believe that that's setting up the future. So when Jesus comes along and the gospel spreads, or you have all these people coming to Jerusalem to worship, where are they coming from? Well, they're the ones coming from all of these places who have been there now for several hundred years. And they're coming to Jerusalem to worship in this temple. There it is again. And then the gospel then blows up from that point. Then Paul goes, and what does he find? synagogues in all these places. And that starts with the Assyrian and the Babylonian destruction of everything. So I think it's all part of the plan. Also, though, this 70 years, don't forget there are people who are old enough in the group that go back to remember Solomon's temple.
Yeah.
So there are some very old people who saw it. 70 years seems like a long time, and it is. It's essentially one lifetime. It's 2 or 3 generations of people, but there are people who remember.
Yeah. And that becomes sort of a point here in this story when they finally do rebuild the temple. By the way, Chronicles, Ezra, and Nehemiah as one continuous story. It seems to be a part of the same telling of the story. And so that theme that we've seen about the temple in Chronicles carries right on into Ezra. And when they rebuild the temple, they have this realization. In fact, there's the way it described it was there was this great noise when they finished the temple, and the people couldn't distinguish between those who were cheering because they had finally done it, and those who were crying because they remembered what the temple looked like.
I think that happens just about the foundation. Like they laid the foundation and they realized this is not going to be close.
Yeah.
Because it still took them a while to. That's another thing. We've got Haggai and Zechariah that happen in here that we're not going to get to for a while.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know if we've planned out the second half of the reading. Maybe we should try totally chronological
reading
for the second half.
That would be interesting. Maybe we should get comments in our section to tell us, should we read chronologically in the second half of the year? Let us know what you think.
Like some of it won't make any difference because it is in chronological, but I think some of it might.
Yeah. Well, what we're going to see as we continue reading is the prophets are going to be placed in throughout this history, especially in the period of the kings and the captivity.
Right.
And so a lot of that we're going to have to sort of jump back and say, don't you remember when? If you read it chronologically, you pick it up right when it happens. Yeah, I'm open to that. Let us know.
I don't know.
Let us know. Okay, so Zerubbabel and Jeshua rebuild the temple.
And why are they important, Andrew?
Well, they're important for a couple of reasons, Mike. Thank you for asking. We actually didn't plan that. This is all unplanned. But they are important characters, and we often overlook them because they're not named. They're not the names of the books. Zerubbabel is actually in the line of David. If there was no captivity, Zerubbabel would likely be your king at this point. And so he sort of takes on the governor role. They obviously don't have their own king, but he takes on a leadership role, being the descendant of David. And then Jeshua is the priest. I assume, my assumption is he's the high priest. I'm trying to remember if he's ever called that off the top of my head, but he very much takes on the priestly role of leadership, the descendant of Aaron. And so they are the first two that lead the way, a priest and a king. And then it's not long before you get Ezra, the scribe, who comes in acting like a prophet.
Right.
You get the trifecta.
And we have a temple. So we have all the things put back in place.
That's right. Everything that they gave up, and they're going to fight tooth and nail. I don't mean to skip too far ahead, but when we get to Nehemiah, the way Nehemiah fights for them to stay he chews people out.
Right.
He chews people out. He
beat some people up.
Literally pulls their hair out. That was one of those stories that I completely forgot was in there.
It was serious business.
Yeah.
We should note here that all that comes together, but they are not. They're never going to be the same. They're never going to be, like we said earlier, like they're going to be under David or Solomon or any of the other kings. They're never going to be that way. They'll have this brief period of time where they're sort of independent, like for 2 minutes, and a couple hundred years later, but then Rome comes along.
Yeah.
So that's part of this whole story that we have to remember is yes, all those things, all those pieces are back, but God never makes it go that step further like they assumed would happen because he has other plans.
Yeah. All right. Ezra, the second wave comes in.
It's about chapter 7, right? Now Ezra's kind of written this history, and then now he's writing from his perspective. He's now part of the story.
Yeah. That's kind of an interesting feature of the book, too. I don't know if y'all noticed that, but the transition from this happened to I did this is kind of a jarring thing. And so Ezra's self-describing what happened, what he did, and his job again, the way I say it is he's come to restore the people, or at least the way they worship God. The temple's been built, but they're not quite doing things the way they should be.
So what restoring worship is restoring the people,
Yeah.
right? Isn't that kind of the point of Kings and Chronicles?
Yeah.
Worship, I mean, God has things that are right and wrong, but when they got worship wrong, everything else really goes awry. As long as they continue to worship right, then the other stuff remains kind of in the background. Not that there aren't sins and so on,
Sure.
but so I think that's that's what he's doing. And I think we should know, a little bit about Ezra the man, right? He talks about his qualifications. He is a priest. He is also a scribe, which basically he's like a lawyer. He's like a PhD in the law. It even says he knows everything about the law. And then he says he, from an early age, this was what he wanted to do. So he saw this coming, and he knew he wanted to go back to Jerusalem and do this. And he set himself up that way. And then he's the one who kind of has, I think we give him most of the credit for sort of putting the Old Testament together in its current form.
Yeah. Traditionally, we ascribe that to him.
Right.
In fact, some people assume or consider him the author of Chronicles even. Maybe he's the guy who penned this history
Makes
for us.
sense.
Yeah. One of the things that strikes me about Ezra's going to show up here when he sort of initially comes back. He's also going to show up at the end of Nehemiah and sort of help Nehemiah with some things there. But I've always been struck by Ezra's insistence on reading the law to the people. Mm-hmm. And that seems to be his main mode of affecting change.
Yeah.
And there's probably a pretty powerful lesson in that for us, that if we want to affect spiritual change in our life, the way to do that is to read the Word of God. And so that's part of why we're doing this.
I think that's why we're here.
It's why we're doing this, is because we believe that there's power to change hearts and minds in the Word. And Ezra is such a perfect example of that. He believed that.
Right. And did it over and over and over.
Yeah.
And you say, well, how do they do that with thousands of people, no microphones and no technology? They did it.
Yeah.
Right? He had a pulpit of wood made, and he stood up there, and then he had other people that then sort of echoed what he said down the line. And so the message...
And interpreted and taught.
And they gave the
translated,
sense.
yeah.
And so I think those are all important lessons. I think both of those things are hugely important. You've got to have just the reading or the introduction of the word itself, but you also need to have it needs to be taught, it needs to be discussed and properly interpreted.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's move on if you're okay with it. Nehemiah, because we still got Esther to cover. This third wave happens. Nehemiah comes, and specifically he wants to build the wall. That's his goal. What do we see there that we need to highlight for our listeners?
Well, who's Nehemiah? He's the cupbearer to one of these kings. Which one is it? See, now I get them all confused.
Artaxerxes.
Is this Artaxerxes?
Yes.
Okay. So there's Xerxes, which is probably
Ahasuerus.
Ahasuerus. I always say Ahasuerus. Ahasuerus, who's probably the same guy. So Esther's going to happen there. So then Artaxerxes comes along later.
I believe he's Ahasuerus' son.
I think that's
we'd
right.
We'd have to check. And there's the other thing about, by the way, if anybody wants to explore Persian kings, the Persian kings have several names that repeat over and over. There's a couple of Xerxes.
Sort of like Pharaoh.
There's a couple of Artaxerxes.
Yep.
There's a couple of Dariuses.
Yep.
It's like Pharaoh or Caesar. Sort of they have their names and they have their royal name.
Right.
But
I think this Xerxes is the Xerxes that we kind of, the big one in history, fighting the Greeks, Thermopylae, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, seems so.
Again, very, very, very powerful people. So here's Nehemiah, the cupbearer. And I love the story because Nehemiah, somebody comes back from Jerusalem. So I said there's a lot of, it's not like the people moved to Jerusalem and then were isolated. This is a gigantic empire that's full of trade and travel, and it's relatively safe and all that. And so Nehemiah hears about the state of things in Jerusalem. Yes, the temple is finally done, but the city is literally in ruins, It has no wall. So he focuses on the wall. That might seem weird to us, and I'm sure you've done, lessons about this, and I have. Like a wall in those days meant safety and security, and it meant that there was economic activity and all those different things that you would associate with success. And so for the temple to be there, but the walls to be, they were destroyed to the point of being nothing. And this was a large, big city for, 1,000 years or more, maybe more. And so that's where he focuses. And so it's just an interesting interplay of what we know about Persian kings. And we think of all these guys as being really terrible people. And they were terrible in some ways and super powerful, and also all of a sudden compassionate. And he notices Nehemiah's discomfort, and he actually says, "What's wrong with you? I've never seen you like this before." So Nehemiah tells him the story, and the king says, "What do you want? What do you want me to do?" And so Nehemiah asks to go.
Yeah. The Persian kings seem to take a very different tact, historically speaking, than the Babylonians and Assyrians before them.
Yes.
They seem to be much more interested in their people following them.
Yes.
Because they cared for them.
A little bit.
And certainly they have their moments that they were fierce in their own way and in their own right.
Well, they were kings.
But the Babylonians we're going to kill you until you follow us. Persians, at least in the scriptural stories, seem to be more, hey.
No, I think that actually bears out in history, because Cyrus didn't only do this for the Hebrews. He did this for a lot of people.
Yeah, sending them back to rebuild. Yeah.
So remember, the Assyrians took everybody and just scatter shot them all over the place, and then they took those people, and that was their way of control. And then the Babylonians kind of followed suit a little bit. But they, I think, were much more, what's the word, civic or government, bureaucratic.
Yeah.
And then you see the Persians definitely have I think this is God working too, but they definitely have a more open policy toward all this.
Yeah. There's a whole cylinder Cyrus had
there's
made.
Several
the Cyrus cylinder is a pretty fascinating thing to look into.
That's what I mean. There's a lot of records from them, from the Babylonians and the Persians, because they wrote everything down. A lot of it was in clay. A lot of it's been preserved.
Yeah. So Nehemiah is working on this wall, and so we've got sort of these three movements of returning to the land. One of the other features I think we ought to just at least mention is at every point along the path of return, God's people were facing opposition. And so this happens right away when they start trying to build the temple.
Right.
It happens sometimes internally. Sometimes it's people within the camp. Nehemiah is going to face people, head on, who are exacting interest from their brethren, and this is a problem. Oftentimes it happens from people in the region who either want to be involved or just don't really care for the strength that they're building.
Right.
What is interesting to me, hope y'all didn't, I think I just bumped my mic. What's interesting to me... How
unprofessional.
I know. What's interesting to me is that in this period of Israelites' history, they combat all of those and overcome them. When we were reading Chronicles and Kings, it felt like every time there was opposition, they bent to it in some way. And so there's a difference in the way they're handling this.
They never almost never fully come back. So, I think it's really interesting to see these movements of people and the things that were done. And it does in Ezra, it kind of starts off, hey, we want to be part of this, and it almost sounds mean. Like when I heard it, when I was listening to it, I was like, it sounds kind of mean. But the point was, like, you're not our people, and so you can't really have a part of this.
Yeah.
And then it becomes, well, we don't want you here. And then it becomes, especially in Nehemiah time, these guys are going to rebel. And it stemmed down to, we don't want you here. Think of how much money. Because again, even when this king sends Nehemiah, it's the same thing. You give them money and wood and whatever they want out of the treasury that those guys control. They don't want to give that up.
Yeah.
And they don't want a city of Jews there. They don't want that for a lot of reasons. And so you can see what they're doing, but it's all political. It's kind of funny to see the bureaucracy at work. they write a letter to the king, and the king has to go, I don't know what happened. These kings are seemingly kind of goofily unaware of what previous kings have done. And maybe that's just part of being a king, where we're used to having all this data. So they would go look, but sometimes this would take years. And it was almost like you sue someone to stop them, and you sort of starve them out by lawsuits. That felt like what they were doing at the beginning.
Yeah.
It's really fascinating.
Well, a lot of the history comes into play here because they don't have email. I mean, to send a letter, they're sending it
it took
miles and
weeks
miles
or
and miles, right? And also, I mean, Jerusalem becomes an important place from a political, like a war standpoint, especially for Persia later on. But at the beginning, I don't know that it really was for them. It's not until the Greeks started bearing down in that direction that they really started like, okay, guys, let's bolster this up a little bit. There's a lot of history that's fascinating here in this period of history. But those people that are in that region that are initially trying to sort of insert themselves, say, we want to be a part of this, it might just be helpful for us to say something about where they came from and maybe what they become later on, right?
Yeah, I think so. That's a good idea.
So these people, in fact, in Ezra chapter 4, they say, we've been here ever since the Assyrians put us here. These are not Israelites, but these are people who the Assyrians transplanted into Israel after taking the Israelites away. And they intermarried and they intermingled with some of the people in the land, no doubt. And I think it was in the days of the Assyrians that the Assyrians said, listen, go teach them the law of the God of that place.
Remember, lions were killed. Literally, God brings up lions and this starts killing everybody.
This is all in the book of Kings.
In Kings. So is it, I get those guys, a Tiglath-Pileser, one of those Assyrians like, we need to send some people to teach them about that, their God, again, a very pagan viewpoint.
Because their concept is their God is punishing them because they're not worshiping him correctly, like the God over that little piece of land.
So these people, in part, are worshiping God, at least as one of the things they're doing.
Yes.
Right? In general.
Yes. And because they've inhabited this land of northern Israel, where the northern tribes of Israel used to live, and Samaria has sort of become the capital of that ever since, I think it was maybe Ahab who made Samaria the capital there. These people come to be known, these transplanted people come to be known as the Samaritans.
Right.
And when we get to the New Testament, the only reason I'm mentioning this, when we get to the New Testament, there's going to be this tension between the Samaritans in the north part of this territory and the people of Judah, the Jews, in the southern part of this territory. And they're going to bump heads quite a bit. And a lot of that starts right here when they weren't allowed to worship God on the mountain in Jerusalem. There's going to be this whole interaction with Jesus. Well, we worship God on this mountain because y'all wouldn't let us worship him there. So anyway,
and then the opening of all this up, right? Like, okay, things are changing.
That's right.
Like, that's a big deal.
So don't overlook some of these stories because these are going to become meaningful later on.
This is why you read and study history. This is one of the reasons why we read this stuff, so that we make those connections in the New Testament. I mean, those writers did it. They always look back to the Old Testament. They made a lot of connections, but there's a whole lot more here that we can see that help us understand what's going on, why it's going on. So,
okay, we got to say something about Esther. Esther. We didn't save enough time, that's for sure. But
don't go watch a movie about Esther and think you're going to get everything. There's been a couple of good ones, don't get me wrong. Enjoyable, but like all movies, they are not the book.
No. The book's always better.
Or are they historically accurate? I love Esther. That was one of the names I might have named one of my daughters, but we had other ones instead.
Esther is such a great book from a literary standpoint. It is the foreshadowing in the book about feasts and hanging people and honoring people. Like, there's all kinds of things that are teased early in the book that when you get to the end, it's like, I see why they were hinting at that now.
Right.
A lot of really fascinating stuff to read.
It is kind of a master class on foreshadowing, for sure.
Yeah.
And it never mentions God's name. That always comes up, right?
Yes.
It's kind of interesting in that way. Clearly, they're talking about faith, and Mordecai talks about rescue or protection for the people, but God's name never comes up, which is strange.
Yeah.
But there's fasting and praying and different things that are happening. It's kind of interesting.
Yeah, we tend to, I think, rightfully acknowledge God's providence in so much of Esther, even though he doesn't speak or he's not even mentioned in the book. One of the things I'll say, and I guess this is my one big observation from Esther, is it might be reasonable to ask the question, why is this story here? Like, what is this doing? How does this help the story of God's people? And remember, I mentioned at the beginning this timeline. Esther's happening while Ezra is in the land,
right,
trying to restore worship, trying to restore the temple to what it should be.
So we think this is that Xerxes.
Yes, I think so. I think so. But what I think is really important for us to recognize is Esther is the story of how God is protecting the people in Jerusalem, even while this is happening miles and miles away. Because that's the whole point of the story at the end, is there's this decree to kill all the Jews in all the provinces,
right,
and Esther gets it so that they can defend themselves. And so this is just another one of those opposition stories. We had a lot of those opposition stories in Ezra and Nehemiah. Here's another one.
And it's for everybody, right? All of them. Like, God's not... People might be led to believe that God's only in Jerusalem. This is a very pagan way to think. He's the God of Israel, or the God of the mountains, or what have you there, right? And he's not the God over here, but no, he is. And I think we're going to see this, Nebuchadnezzar learns this, and some of these other kings. I think this king, Xerxes or Ahasuerus, learns this, and that's why some of their decrees are, and they name him the God of gods, and they have learned. I'm not saying they're totally in, but they at least will acknowledge. They will acknowledge that this God is real and he's legitimate.
Yeah.
And that then causes them to do some of these movements.
Yeah. In Esther, I think it's interesting how often unlikely characters rise up and play important roles. And that happens in other biblical stories too. But I think it starts out with how often eunuchs in the court play important roles in Esther. And it's just like, who are these guys? And why are they playing such big roles? It's a eunuch that sort of guided Esther through the process. Mm-hmm. It's a eunuch that sent the messages back and forth between Mordecai and Esther. It's a eunuch that says, "Hey, there's a stake over there we can impale Haman on." So they're sort of like, these are unlikely characters. And then you start looking around, and Mordecai's the last guy you would expect to save the king of Persia and be honored. Right. Esther is the last person you'd expect to rise to the position of queen and then go and intercede for. I think that's an interesting lesson there, is God uses these unlikely people.
Mm-hmm. Well, isn't that what Mordecai said? Maybe you were put in this place for such a time as this.
Yeah,
kind of famous line from Esther. Who knows? And yes, it worked out as you would expect. And again, some of the details sound funny. The decrees can't be undone. Like that seems weird to us Americans. You can undo anything, right? We can change the Constitution with enough votes and process, but these kings are like, no, we can't do that. And that we'll see that again in Daniel, right? They kind of get themselves into these same kings, some of these same people, some of them, Darius and so on, Cyrus, will kind of get themselves into these little jams, and these guys are no different. But they have this recognition. Something about that is different. Something about these people is different, and so God always comes through, as we know. So I think we look at the bigger picture, because you might get that idea that God's just the God of Jerusalem. That's all he cares about, or he only cares about the Jews, and that's not the case. Never has been. When we get to all these prophets, we'll see a bunch of prophets went to other people besides the Israelites.
Yeah.
So God still got his hand in here, and I wonder if we were in captivity I was born in captivity, I would be like, where is God? I think that would be a natural view. Mm-hmm. Where is God? What's going on? When's he gonna save us, or what is he doing? And I
Yeah.
think there might be a lot of people probably who maybe left, maybe sort of turned off to following this God that doesn't seem to be doing any good. Which was the argument that those guys would make, right? They would come to the king. They did it in Kings. We said it. We saw it in Chronicles. Like, your God didn't stop the king of Assyria from destroying this, or the king of Babylon from destroying this. Like, no, he didn't. But there was a reason.
Yeah.
So I think seeing how God interacts with more people, again, setting the stage for what's going to happen when Jesus comes.
Yeah. Yeah. Let's do a quick preview for next week's reading. Job. We are stepping away from books of history. And by that, I don't mean that Job is not historical. I think there's some good evidence that maybe Job was, I think he was a real historical character. But in terms of this history that we've been reading, going through Israelite history,
it's been largely in order, minus a lot of the prophets.
Job is going to be out of that chronological order, and the style of Job is going to start being radically different than what we've read.
Yep. Very different book. Very a lot. It's very different. It's a soup. Again, I think people know a little bit about Job. The patience of Job is a common phrase probably in American English. So there's a lot more to it than that.
Yeah. So here's going to be the big challenge with Job. And if you've not read Job, buckle up. This may be a challenging reading for you. Most of the book is just going to be conversation. Mm-hmm. No action, just the words that they're saying. And what's going to complicate that is it's going to be in poetry. It's not going to be standard speech.
So this is part of that group of books of poetry that we're getting into, this genre. And that's something we'll talk about at some point.
Sure.
I'm going to preach about it, probably do another video on it. But
yeah,
poetry is a little different.
Poetry's going to be different. I don't know. Here. I guess I'm going to give this piece of advice, and if you've got more advice, feel free to piggyback. But my advice to you is, as much as possible, there's going to be these whole speeches that people give. It'll be Job giving a speech. It'll be a friend giving a speech. It'll be another friend giving a speech. And they'll go through this cycle where everybody gets to speak. I think it's 3 times they go through this cycle, and there's some more conversation at the end. As much as is possible, I would just encourage you to pause at the end of these speeches and try as best you can, and some of them are really going to be challenging, but just try to summarize, what did he just say? Mm-hmm. Now, I'm not going to say you're going to be able to do that every time. It's going to be hard. It's hard for me, because a lot of times it's like you feel so scattered what they're saying. But just see if that helps as you read it. That'd be my advice to try to tackle this book.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I also, my belief is this book is very old. In other words, historically it's set way earlier, so there's kind of
we're talking like maybe back when in
Genesis,
Abraham's time, something like that.
So a different understanding of God and how God works. You can see this from his friends in particular.
Yeah,
they have like this understanding of how life works, and it's not correct.
Yeah,
but that's kind of where they're basing a lot of their arguments from. So it's kind of remember that it's I would just call it a more primitive sort of understanding of cosmic things.
Yeah. Well, and you remind me of one more thing I'll say to sort of help people through the book. If you feel like you're getting bogged down in the conversation, that might be by design. I don't know that for a fact, but maybe we're meant to feel bogged down in this because a lot of the conversation is dense and challenging. Just know that there is going to come a time at the end of the book where God is going to speak.
Yep.
And even if everything else goes over your head, or if you just say, I don't even understand what they're saying, by the time God speaks, hopefully a lot of it is clarified, or at least what should be clarified is clarified.
Right. So. I think so. You have that really interesting courtroom scene, the throne room scene at the beginning. But yes, definitely this book, the meat is in the conclusion, I guess, which is unusual, but that's definitely the point is in the conclusion.
It's building up to that climax for certain. All right. maybe we end our conversation there.
I think so.
And talk about Job next week. But appreciate you guys for tuning in. Like the video, subscribe to the video, share the video, talk about the video, comment on the video. What else?
What else can we do?
I don't know.
Re-edit the video and post it on your own YouTube. I don't know.
Only glamour shots.
Let us know how the reading's going. Let us know how you're
Yeah.
doing. Again, any questions you have, we would be happy to answer those.
Yeah. Very good. We'll talk to you guys later. Appreciate y'all.